Thank you for joining Moms Rising tonight on our community meeting and resistance lab. I want to take a moment to hand it over to our interpreter, Murtado, to give some instructions, and then I'll be right back.
Thank you, Monifa. I'm going to make this announcement in Spanish. Muy buenas tardes, ya noches para la mayoría de nosotros y nosotras. Queremos explicarles cómo conectarse para escuchar esto en español. En la parte inferior de la pantalla van a encontrar un globito. Si se conectan desde una computadora, donde pueden seleccionar español y escuchan todo el contenido en español. Si no ven el globito, ven los tres punticos. Vayan a los tres puntos del teléfono celular o tableta, seleccionen interpretación español y todo queda activado. Thank you so much, Monifa. I have given the instructions and I'm going to post them again in the chat, but for now, I'll send it back to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for all of our listeners tuning in Spanish. So please drop your name and city in the chat so we can see how big and broad our movement is together. Please also feel free to comment in the chat. That option is the button of is at the bottom of your screen. Once you open the chat, click on the blue box at the bottom of the chat window, select everyone so all of us can see your comments. And next up, I'm going to hand it over to Kristen.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining us tonight. We know you're busy, so we're really excited that you're here. We love seeing those names and those cities in the chat. I love seeing how many cities and states and all the places we're covering. It shows how broad and powerful our movement is together, so thanks for adding that in. And a big thanks again for joining us tonight. Tonight is about organizing ourselves, building a resistance, and expanding our movement. Before we dive into our learning program, we're going to be joined by a very, very, very special guest. I'm so excited. This is such a treat. We have a leader for care, a champion for democracy, a leader among leaders, Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi. She has already been named by historians as the greatest speaker of all time because of her groundbreaking effectiveness. And as I like to tell her, she is always the speaker of my heart because she puts the children, and families first always. And speaking of the U.S. House, it has been a, well, shall we say, interesting week in Congress as House Republicans have worked through the night to attempt to get their caucus in order and pass an extremely damaging Republican-led tax and budget package that blatantly chooses tax breaks for billionaires and people who are super wealthy over lowering costs for families, and that's hurting our economy. So for those of you who have joined our meetings in the past few months, you already know what's at stake, and we're going to say it again. Massive cuts to programs that are the tools for people to thrive, the tools for people to go to work, to raise kids, and to contribute to our communities, like Medicaid, SNAP, childcare, and public schools. All of these cuts are happening to provide trillions of dollars in tax cuts to mega corporations and people who are already ultra wealthy, and also to fund human rights abuses against immigrant families. That is not okay. So to this we say, no way, not on our watch. And to this we say thank you to the leaders who are rising up. We are thrilled to have Speaker Emerita, again, the greatest speaker of all time, Nancy Pelosi, here with us tonight to bring a special insider update on what's going on in Congress, and importantly, and this is really important, why the power of moms and people across the country are needed now more than ever. Welcome, Speaker Emerita Pelosi. Let's give her lots of hearts. Let's give her a round of applause. Woo! Welcome.
Thank you, Kristen. It's always a joy to hear you and your enthusiasm. Thank you for what you are doing to make the future better for the children. My friends, I know that you know Kristen and you know her good work. I just want you to know that on every occasion, whether it's to preside, whether it's to participate, whether it's just to originate an idea, she's always there with such, she puts us all, we just sets the pace. What can I say? And Donna, thank you for all you've done for Moms Rising as well. Monica, you said it so beautifully earlier, but let me just say thank you to all of you, because the outside mobilization, and Kristen's heard me say this, and Donna and others of you all the time, the outside mobilization is what makes the difference. I just got off the plane from Washington. We were in until after 6 a.m. this morning, and I had a morning flight to come home to San Francisco to be with you, and then we have some other immigration issues later this evening. But the thing is, we were there until the middle of the night. We started Tuesday in the middle of the night, 1 a.m., in a rules committee, and then two nights of no sleep. And you know what? It came down to one vote. So when you're out there now with the call, understand the importance of your calls. It comes down to one vote. So any one of them made the difference in taking $300 billion away from SNAP, made the difference in taking $700+ billion from Medicaid, made the difference from what we learned this week, also $500 billion from Medicare. Kristen used the word thrive. We want families to thrive. We want them to thrive. We want them to succeed, and we want them to be transformative. And that's what Moms Rising has been all about, the power of moms to make your voices heard and the rest. That, again, never underestimate your power. You don't. That's why Moms Rising is, 1 million people strong. I wish you could have seen, just for the Kristen said something about the inside, because it was the middle of the night. I assume you didn't see, but Hakeem Jeffries was spectacular. He just covered the whole field of issues that are bad in this bill. And then this designated speaker, the speaker for the evening, interrupted, and he said, I want you to address your remarks to me and not to the Republicans. That's the rule to me. So Hakeem said back, wait a minute, they were pointing to us all through their remarks, and you never said anything to them. So why are you just saying it to me all the time? Well, so Hakeem says, I don't work for you. I don't work for you. I work for the people of America. And of course, the place went crazy. Now, mind you, we're on all night now. This is 5:30 or something like that. But Hakeem was spectacular. I told him it was one of the best speeches ever on the floor of the House, because it was values-based. It was about the children. And just think of this. They're taking food out of the mouths of babies to give tax breaks to the wealthiest people. They contend that they are fiscally responsible. And what do? They add over $4 trillion to the national debt for that. I just want you to know this. They're going to give the tax breaks whether they cover the action or not. What this is, it's engineering. It's budget engineering. They want to get rid of Medicaid. They want to get rid of Social Security. They want to get rid of all of that. So they use waste, fraud, and abuse. And we're saying to them, our kids are not waste, fraud, and abuse. Our seniors, our people with disabilities, our veterans, they are not waste, fraud, and abuse. That's who uses these initiatives. So this is a real fight, not just for this bill, but for governance and values-based governance in our country. So know the power of what you are doing. I know you do, but I want you to know that we all recognize it as well. Inside maneuvering, you just go so far. Outside mobilization, that makes the difference. You're the masters of it. So thank you, all of you, for what you're doing. I was listening to Manifa earlier. I want to hear more about what you all have to say. I'm here with Christine. She sends her regards. And thank you. Kristen, Donna, Monica, all of you, for making a difference for people, not only to thrive, but to succeed, and for this to be transformative. We have to win all of this, and we will win the next election. We will take back the House. With your help, we did that in 2018. We'll do it again now, but it is as bad as it can be. One thing I'll tell you, this one really was stunning to me, because it's not that much money, but it was a big deal to them. There's a $200 tax on silencers. So one of their big moves in this bill was to remove the $200 tax on silencers. That tax, the silencers have been taxed since 1930. 1930. And they decided they're going to make what? The world less safe, the country less safe for our children by taking that off. And worse than that, they took it into a category that you can just buy over the counter without any identification or anything like that. So this is very dangerous, and we're hoping that we can change that in the Senate. I don't know if we can do the money part, but we certainly, that's a policy matter to change the character, the a designation of what a gun or a weapon is. So in any event, we have important work to do. You've been in the forefront. I'm enormously grateful. We all recognize it. But remember, every single one of them made the difference. Without that one, they would have lost. Thank you, Kirsten. Thank you all for what you do. I'm eager to hear what else. Now, I always learn from you, so I'm eager to do that now. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. For the children.
For the children. I love it. And people, I want you to join me with a lot of hearts, a lot of love, a lot of thanks for Speaker Emerita Pelosi, for her leadership, for her insights, for her guidance, and for reminding us why we're here tonight. I want to remind you something that is really important. When we heard Speaker Emerita Pelosi say that we can win, she has the proof. She has the receipts that winning can happen. In Trump's first time in office, we were in a similar situation where Republican leadership in the House, in the Senate, and Donald Trump were all trying to get rid of the Affordable Care Act, which covers tens of millions of people's health care. But even though people said there was no way we could win, together we rose time and time again. And then more 52 times Republicans tried to get rid of the Affordable Care Act, and more than 52 times with Speaker Emeritus Pelosi, we won. And that is why we are here today with the Affordable Care Act intact against all odds. So I want to give a thank you again to Speaker Emerita Pelosi, just for showing us that the path forward for our families, for our children, for our country is possible, and that we are more powerful than we often think and can win even when everybody thinks we can't. So let's give her some more hearts. Thank you.
Well, Kirsty, if I just may acknowledge what you said, and I want everyone to know, in that election of 2018, the only thing they did in their term when they had the majority was a tax cut for the wealthiest people, giving 83% of the benefits of their tax bill to the top 1% at the cost of working families in our country. So when the election came, when they said those, I hate to call him the president, but what's his name? He said, Obamacare sucks. Imagine, forgive me, but I'm just quoting the president. Obamacare sucks. And I said, no, it doesn't suck. It cures. We had, with your help, we had 10,000 events around the country where people told their stories. And that's really important, because it wasn't about provisions of the bill or this or that. It was stories. My baby was born with a heart condition. My wife has breast cancer, whatever it is, and what Affordable Care Act meant to them. So then we won the election. People said, weren't you lucky that healthcare was the issue in the campaign? We said, we weren't lucky. We made our own luck, and you were participating in that. We won 40 seats, 31 of them in Trump's districts that he had won, and we intend to do this now, but with improved communication and the rest of that, and with all of you. So that we'll put a stop to what they're doing. We just have to put a check on what they're doing between now and 18 months from now, when Hakeem Jeffries will be the Speaker of the House. Thank you again.
I love the direction you're going. 18 months from now, we'll have Hakeem Jeffries as the Speaker of House, meaning the Democrats will have won that House back. And this is important, because this is what we're doing tonight. We're doing long-term leadership development, resistance training. We're expanding our movement. And we're doing this in a time where the consequences of the Republican-led budget are harmful, they're damaging, and they're frankly scary. Mirroring the time that we had Donald Trump in office last time, it's also going after healthcare again. Medicaid covers about 80 million people's healthcare, and that is on the line. We've seen time and time again about how the power the voices of moms, of families have been essential to protecting our communities, our economy, and our democracy. So thank you again to Speaker Emerita Pelosi for fighting for us and with us. And now, drum roll, please. We're going to start to dive into the tactics for effectively expanding our movement. We're so excited to have everybody here tonight for the, quote, Resistance Lab. It's a program and training built by U.S. Representative Pramila Jayapal. Congresswoman Jayapal is from Washington State, and she comes from a long history of movement building herself. And she's also in Congress. So she has some ideas, she has some tactics, she has some special strategies, and we're going to share those. Tonight's training is part of an ongoing Resistance Lab training that has been developed over time, and it has received incredibly powerful responses. People are loving it. Thousands of people across the country, including those of us here tonight, are rising up, we're skilling up, we're expanding our movement, and we're ready to persist for children, for our families, and for our democracy. So welcome. And as we set the stage, if you're on social media, please follow us or tag us at Moms Rising and at Pramila Jayapal. And if you want, you can even use the hashtag Resistance Lab when you're posting. So the energy, the reason we are all here today, the reason we are all rising together is because you understand that the stakes are incredibly high for democracy, for families, for the world, for all of us. And we all need to work together to save our country, resist the horrible dismantling of agencies, the attack on free speeches, the attack on our institutions. Hello, we need the Department of Education. The attack on our rights that we are seeing Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and their Project 2025 cronies move forward. The scary truth, and there is some scary stuff happening here, is that history shows us that democracy can fall in a matter of months. History also shows us it doesn't have to be that way. The good news is that we have proven organizing tools and tactics at our disposal, and we have the people power on our side, starting with you. So go ahead and keep putting your name and your city in the chat if you haven't done that yet. Let's keep the chat going. Moms and caregivers do the work every day of community, and we are the ones that we have been waiting for. We deal with constant challenges, constant fear, anxiety, and uncertainty stemming from the lack of caregiving programs like access to childcare, paid family medical leave, healthcare for all, and from feeling undervalued in our society. And we also have anxiety often about the deep concerns relating to the others who we're caring for. Yet we are constantly turning that anxiety into power. We're constantly turning our fear into action. We're constantly rising for our children and our families, and we all know how to do this already. And if we ever needed a movement full of moms and caregivers to be bigger and bolder, it is now. So this training tonight is an immediate, urgent matter. And we're coming together to build our understanding about some of the more effective models of resistance in the face of authoritarian takeovers that have happened around the world and through history. And yes, we're also working to expand our movement. Of course, we're also fighting back in Congress against Republican-led disaster and in the courts. And what history and what you just heard from Speaker Emerita Pelosi and what the current moment tells us clearly is that governments and institutions do not save people from dictators alone. The people save us from that. That's us. It's large-scale mass movements of people that are our best line of offense. So myself, as a longtime organizer across progressive movements, yes, I feel like I started organizing in, maybe 523,000 years ago. This is what I know. We have to embrace, build, and grow our power, our knowledge, our resources, our skills, and our movement together. And that's why Congresswoman Jayapal launched the Resistance Lab. She's on the same page with all of us. And that's why we at Moms Rising are joining forces to build and strengthen the grassroots movement that we have. We are over 1.2 million members strong. 1 in 300 people in America are now active members of Moms Rising. And we're doing this training and series of trainings to understand the moment we're in right now, to learn from other countries and from other times in histories, and to have tools to address situations that are coming in front of us. To be clear, and you all already know this, this is not a one and done thing. This is a marathon, not a sprint, and we are here with you along the way all the time. We will have additional trainings even as we hold this training tonight, and we are going to keep giving additional tools. So tonight, we have 3 primary awesome goals. 1, community. We're developing and expanding our community of people together who have the same goals and understandings of what we can do by learning and what other people have done around the world. And we're thinking of creative tactics together to be strategic in the most effective ways. Give me a heart in the chat if you are in here for community. 2, expand. We're continuing to grow our movement. We want to expand your friends, families, and neighbors who agree with us. We want to build an ever-expanding network of contacts and people where each of us can be catalysts for change with the people we're connected to so we can spread this understanding beyond the people in this room tonight. And thank you for being here tonight. Give me some hearts in the chats and all over the place if you want to expand. 3, strategize. We're here to help seed, participate in, and coordinate actions that will help make a difference. If you all are getting the almost daily actions that you can take action in from Moms Rising, that's great. We're here to do even more, but keep it up with the actions. I counted how many actions our members have taken in 2025 alone. Over 833,000 actions, people. We are making a difference. Now, people are like, what is happening right now? How do you frame this in a mom movement? Well, if we were in the labor movement, we might call this moment right now getting strike ready. But we think of it as getting democracy defender ready. We are getting democracy defender ready. Maybe some hearts in the chat for defending democracy. Let's do that. So part of defending democracy is understanding our own strength. And also, as we develop that strength, being able to look at our risk tolerance, what we feel we can do, and knowing that risk tolerance sometimes increases as the severity of situations may increase, and as our own understanding of what happening may increase. So different actions have different consequences for different groups of people. We all know that. So everyone has to assess their own ability to absorb and participate along a spectrum of activities that we're going to talk about tonight. Overall, the more we understand what's effective, the more we understand what the risks are, and the more we understand who will be ready to participate, the more impact we can have together. That's why this resistance lab is so powerful. So let me tell you how this training will go. In a minute, I'm going to introduce you to Erica Chenoweth. Have you heard of her? Give me a heart in the chat if you've heard of her. Lots of people are raving about her training. She is one of the brightest minds in the study of resistance movements around the world and of protecting democracies. Then we'll come back and offer you some frameworks of resistance and of movement expansion, and we'll also talk about principles and tactics for actions. You all, it is fun. And then we're going to do some practice applying these concepts. So are you ready? Are you ready? Let's hear some hearts. Are you ready? Yes, we're ready. That's hearts. Let's do some ready. So, okay, we're going to go. So with that, I'm super excited to introduce you to Erica Chenoweth. Erica is the Frank Stanton Professor of the First Amendment at the Harvard Kennedy School, and she directs the Nonviolent Action Lab at Harvard's Ash Center for Democratic Governance and Innovation. Hello, Rockstar. She studies political violence and, importantly, its alternatives. She is a leading expert in history of democratic backsliding and how people effectively resist authoritarianism and push for systemic change. Say that 5 times fast. They're exactly the expertise that we all need right now. So without further ado, I introduce Erica.
I'm Erica Chenoweth, a political scientist who studies social movements, democracy, and authoritarianism. In my personal capacity, I prepared this short video essay about the history and practice of nonviolent resistance in the context of democratic backsliding. That's because we're in the midst of a global democratic recession, and each year over varieties of political regime type, like Freedom House, the Varieties of Democracy Project, and the Polity Project, have recorded a general decline in the number of countries that are democratic and a rise in the number that are autocratic. In 2024, this trend seems to have accelerated somewhat because of a global anti-incumbent wave that tended to elevate far-right parties or leaders, including in the US. As I record this essay, the US is at a crossroads in its own history, a moment in which civil society and civic institutions either push back and defend democracy in the US, or the US may slide deeper into authoritarianism.
Have you seen this guy? You know, the one that keeps telling us to
stop running on the treadmill.
Well, you might want to listen to this.
If you want to drop this.
Democracy is a process, not a destination, and no democracy is perfect. But there are some basic minimal standards in terms of rule of law, separation of powers, checks and balances, and respect for the rights of inhabitants, such as free expression, assembly, conscience, and due process, that allow for the pursuit of many possibilities and collective futures. Most importantly, as Stephen Levitsky and Daniel Ziblatt have argued, democracies only survive when their leaders are committed to upholding democracy themselves, when they respect institutions meant to check their power, like the results of elections, congressional statutes, or judicial decisions, when they tolerate the presence of opposition and dissent, and when they refuse to use or condone violence as a way of sorting out partisan differences. So one of the three projects that I mentioned earlier has already issued its own determination about where the US currently stands. Political scientist Monty Marshall of the Polity Project, which catalogs global regimes around the world since 1800, has already claimed that his project would be downgrading the United States to a non-democracy. He argued that by February of 2025, the country had experienced what he calls an adverse regime change due to an auto coup or executive coup, which means that the president had already usurped sufficient power through the executive branch to minimize or eliminate any oversight within it. There's also an intense level of partisan factionalism in the country, and there are no effective checks and balances on the executive by Marshall's estimation. And indicators that this might be true include things like defiance of federal court orders and injunctions, dismantling of congressionally mandated agencies like USAID and next the Department of Education, the withholding of funds from congressionally approved grants through the NIH, NSF, FEMA, and the like, the elevation of the false narrative that the 2020 election was stolen, attacks on sites of independent thought like the media, science, universities, law firms, and think tanks, the detention and threat of deportation of student protesters and other activists, the attempt to erase speech and control expression related to civil rights in the US's racial history in both public and private institutions, the scapegoating and dehumanization of minority groups, from immigrants to trans people, ignoring or refusing to comply with court rulings, including the Supreme Court's ruling that the federal government must facilitate the return of Kilmar Abrego Garcia from an El Salvador prison, and assertions that the president is above the law. These are all signs of executive overreach. And these actions belie a lack of commitment to the rule of law or the Constitution, much less the norms of self-restraint that are required for democracies to function. The role of Elon Musk and Doge has made the current moment both more complex and potentially more urgent as private interests seize one of the most powerful public trusts the US government possesses, the private and personal data of those within its borders. And so the question is, what can be done? The answer is a lot. Scholars have learned from countries that have come back from the brink, and they have found that civil society can do a great deal, and it matters what civil society does. In almost every major historical example over the past 100 years, movements that stand up to aspiring autocrats are what make the difference. Formal institutions are important, but they alone cannot protect democracy because they're often too closely aligned with the autocrat or they're totally sidelined to the degree that the autocrat simply ignores them. But ordinary people organizing in their communities and mobilizing in nonviolent collective action have made a big difference in determining how far an aspiring autocrat can go in consolidating power, or how long an autocratic government can maintain control once it has established itself. Whether we're talking about how the civil rights movement in the United States mobilized against the autocratic Jim Crow system of segregation in the South, or how the Solidarity movement organized and mobilized against the communist regime in Poland, how Chileans broke through the fear and terror of Augusto Pinochet's far-right regime to peacefully force his ouster, how the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa created a democratic breakthrough against a white supremacist regime, how Koreans have mobilized against an attempted coup just a few months ago in South Korea. In all of these cases, a strong and sustained defense of freedom, justice, and accountability from the grassroots to the grass tops has been a critical factor. And that's true even when this seems far-fetched. That's because no government, no matter how tyrannical,
I'm here in Marissa Tomei's kitchen. You look amazing, by the way.
Thank you. 59. Go.
is monolithic. Every tyrant or aspiring tyrant has always been totally dependent on the cooperation, obedience, and help of thousands of people and various pillars of support. Aspiring autocrats like to project strength, permanence, and absolute loyalty and fealty, and that's to make people feel powerless, alone, demoralized, and demobilized. But people are not powerless, and they're never alone. Actually, people who oppose oligarchy and autocracy are in the majority in most countries around the world, though it can be hard for them to act like a majority sometimes, and especially under pressure. The other thing to remember is that autocratic power is not permanent. It is actually extremely fragile. Loyalty has to be constantly refreshed and rewarded. This means that there are near constant opportunities to dislocate the power holder from their pillars and make it harder for them to implement their plans. That means that movements don't have to convince the tyrant that they're right. They just need to get enough people to stop cooperating with him. So how does that happen? It happens through civil resistance, which is a method in which ordinary people decide to work together in a coordinated, strategic way to defend, demand, and improve democracy through nonviolent means. And what makes it successful are generally four key things. The first is numbers and momentum. The second is loyalty shifts and key pillars of support. The third is resilience and discipline in the face of repression. And the fourth is the use of a variety of nonviolent methods. So let me start with numbers and momentum. You may have heard of the 3.5% rule. And that figure references the fact that historically, it's very rare for anti-authoritarian movements to fail after having achieved that participation threshold. There's more to the rule, and there's no guarantee that this number will be predictive going forward. But the important thing about knowing that 3.5% of a population has been a critical threshold in the past is that it's a powerful indicator that a movement has already organized and attracted a broad base of committed participants that has built significant power and momentum. So if we think about momentum in linear physics, that quantity is mass times velocity. In movement terms, a study by myself and Margarita Belgioso suggested that movement momentum might also be stylized by multiplying the number of participants nationwide by the total number of protest events in a prior week. And in a regional sample, we found that this indicator has been a powerful predictor of whether a leader decides to resign. So why is that? Why is momentum so important? Because it bears heavily on that second key factor related to movement success. It builds pressure in ways that might induce loyalty shifts in those pillars of support. So recall that no power holder is monolithic, and neither are the social, political, economic, and cultural pillars that uphold the status quo. These pillars can include the economic and business community, organized labor and professional associations, cultural or religious institutions, state-aligned media, civil servants, police, military and other security forces, and the like. Within each pillar, there are lots of people or groups that have their own self-interests. Take the business sector, for example. Within the business sector, there are tons of corporations, and each corporation obviously has its own CEO and C-suite executives, but it also has mid-level managers and workers, vendors and contractors, shareholders, advertisers, distributors, retailers, salespeople, and consumers. So each of these groups is made up of people with a diverse range of interests that might shift their loyalties or investments if it helps their own bottom line. So we saw something play out like this during the California grape boycott mobilized by Cesar Chavez and the California farm workers movement, during which workers organized consumer boycotts of Safeway and other grocery stores that sold grapes from unscrupulous grape farmers. So when Safeway decided to stop carrying the grapes, the grape farm owners lobbied the US government to increase subsidies, and the government purchased the grapes to send overseas to troops serving in Vietnam. But when the grapes arrived on the docks to ship overseas, the Longshoremen's Union refused to load the grapes onto the ships, and they spoiled on the docks. Ultimately, the Farm Workers Union was able to negotiate key concessions from the grape farm owners, and that was a major win for the movement. In Chile, it was miners who kicked off the resistance to Pinochet, going on strike and ultimately providing a rallying point for there to be an effective organizing and mobilizing campaign around a referendum that Pinochet.
You know what's in your cheap protein powder? Well, here to tell us is all-natural fitness athlete Paul Sklar.
All right, let's see.
Put forward to give him extra time in office. And they used that opportunity to effectively mobilize a huge no vote that won in the end. And the military decided to stand by the vote rather than by Pinochet when he asked them to intervene on his behalf. In South Africa, it was economic pressure that created the political pressure for the National Party, which up to then had been the pro-apartheid party, to actually unban the ANC, begin negotiations, and approve the country's first ever democratic elections. In Poland, the Solidarity movement was literally the trade union movement that over the course of years built an irresistible alternative to the communist regime and laid out the path for a democratic transition. And in Serbia, it was police who refused to fire on demonstrators in Belgrade, with some later saying that they thought they saw their kids in the crowd. So what's important here about these loyalty shifts is that they don't necessarily mean that people within pillars fully switch to the opposition. Instead, there's always a spectrum of potential allies, from the active opponents of a movement to passive opponents to the movement, to people who are neutral or want to stay uninvolved, to one's own passive allies, and then one's own active allies. And loyalty shifts rarely mean getting active opponents to swing all the way over to becoming passive or active allies. Instead, it looks like getting some passive opponents to become neutral or uninvolved. The Serbian security forces didn't put down their guns and join the movement. They just refused to carry out an unlawful order that would have been costly for themselves and their families. So movements don't win by melting the hearts of their active opposition, but instead they win by constraining their options, by getting enough people and enough pillars to move one notch away from the opponent. And that can be enough to shift the balance of power in total. The third thing that successful movements do is they maintain resilience and organizational discipline, even as violence or the threat of violence against the movement escalates. So being able to anticipate and prepare for an escalation in a way that does not throw a movement off of its plan can be key to ensuring that a repressive episode might backfire. That means being able to clearly document and widely distribute any abuses, explain why the violence was unjust, disproportionate, and demonstrate the peaceful nature of the movement, providing direct support to people who need assistance. Such techniques can help any violence against the movement ultimately backfire. And then the fourth thing that successful movements do is they use a variety of nonviolent methods rather than repeating the same method over and over again. This means building methods of nonviolent protest and persuasion, but also non-cooperation and potentially the building of alternative institutions. So right now in the United States, the Crowd Counting Consortium project, which involves collaborators of mine as well, has tallied thousands and thousands of protests taking place in the United States. Between the period of January 22nd and the end of March 2025, our best guess is that 3 times as many protests have occurred during that period than happened during the same period in 2017. So there's a lot of protest happening in the United States right now. In terms of non-cooperation, we are also seeing signs of this, or at least an appetite for this, through things like boycotts or boycotts, the sellbacks of Teslas, corporate shareholder votes that reject anti-DEI proposals, etc. And I think that in many cases where movements have succeeded in the past, they've been able to do so by moving to the ability to withhold labor, either through limited strikes or even through general strikes, which is perhaps the most effective method of nonviolent resistance that people have ever developed. And then the third category of methods of nonviolent action that have been used by successful movements include alternative institutions. And this is more about building beloved community or building a vision for a future that appeals to people, that is irresistible. And we're seeing that through the development of mutual aid, the organization of workers who've been laid off, attempts to pool resources to provide support to people who are under threat, and a new sense of civic solidarity among a broad range of people. Alternative institutions can also include things like new media or new ways of solving local problems that increasingly make the autocrat and what the autocrat wants to do irrelevant in local communities. So, although there are no guarantees and there's no way to predict the future, political scientists have long studied how an engaged and mobilized civil society affects the quality of democracy. And even in countries that have transitioned ultimately to democracy, movements have been very important in holding them to account and in expanding rights. For example, for every progressive change that has been seen to improve the democratic experiment in the United States, a mass movement was generally behind it, whether it was for the abolition of slavery, the expansion of the vote, labor rights, civil rights, reproductive rights, the protection of the environment, and many others. So movements to uphold and improve democracy have always been important in the expansion and renewal of democracy. There are many, many examples from history of people resisting authoritarianism, and many of these are still ongoing today. If history is any guide, the current global democratic recession may indeed reverse course, especially if committed networks of civil society are able to organize and mobilize effectively.
Hey, speaking of the chat, feel free to keep it going. So now that we have grounded, let's turn to hope results, which comes from the group Harnessing Our Power to End Political Violence. As we know, political violence is on the rise, and those who perpetrate this violence use specific tactics to inflict harm. Of course, we want to make a distinction, a clear distinction between political violence and self-defense. Political violence is used to intimidate and attack for political gain, while self-defense is a human right when someone is under attack or threat. The good news is that we have ways that we can make those actions of political violence backfire. This guide is designed to help people across the U.S. to counter political violence and uphold democracy and stand up to political violence in a way that both supports victims and imposes costs on those who incite and engage in abuse. The Hope Guide gives us some tools to think about how to make sure political violence backfires and those that incite, threaten, and enact it. The goal here is to make sure that when any kind of political violence takes place, perpetrators face high costs for their actions. We want to shift incentives so that political violence is no longer profitable to the perpetrators. We want their actions to backfire on them and become counterproductive. So how do we do that? When we talk about costs on perpetrators in the case of Trump's administration, we think about costs in two ways. First, there are direct losses to the perpetrators, include loss of political support, the loss of social standing, economic losses, and in some cases, being held legally accountable. Second, there is an increasing support power, and mobilization by those who oppose political violence. For example, by rallying around people who are targeted by political violence, engaging in greater voter registration and turnout, pushing for new laws to be passed and enforced, and supporting many other efforts that run counter to the goals of the perpetrators. The backfire model is based on tried and true principles that have been applied in various cases around the world, and it's been used in organizing campaigns to knock down those pillars of support that Erica showed us, to counter abuse and help people anticipate the kinds of violence that perpetrators will take. The backfire model is based on 5 R's: to heighten concern, empathy, and increase mobilization against injustice. The first R, reveal, expose the injustice. Our opponents want to operate in secret. We can track, expose, and call them out and anyone who backs them. Expose their actions with reports, information, pictures, and credible stories. The next R is redeem, validate the target, and humanize those who are attacked. Our opponents want to demonize our people. We can also find ways to humanize through storytelling, mutual aid, evidence of good work, positive energies, and solidarity. Understand, though, that it is important to add here that we don't want to fall into the trap of good victim, bad victim either. Everyone deserves human rights. You don't earn them through your worth to power structures or corporate interests, or even the larger society. Reframe, interpret the event as an injustice and tell a different story. Our opponents want to minimize, blame, and lie about their intentions. How can we tell the truth about the injustices, translate our moral outrage into reports, media reports, and art that support us and us as unlikely allies? One of the ideas that came out of the first training from a group was on immigration, reframing the deporting criminals idea to kidnapping, disappearing, and abducting our neighbors. The next R is to redirect, mobilize support, and make use of unofficial channels like town halls, people's movement assemblies, direct actions, cultural events, popular education events and modules, civil disobedience, to keep public outrage and concern alive. Our opponents want us to use official channels like law enforcement or official inquiries. Instead, we want to move away from policing and use non-carceral interventions that can redirect our energy toward public action so our opponents can't hide behind slow, closed-door, expert-driven processes. Resist. Resist intimidation and bribes. The administration rewards people who remain silent. The opponents will deliver bribes, incentives, and intimidation to silence or divide us. We can expose these attempts at intimidation while also building resistant structures of healing, support, and solidarity. Understanding the basic frame of this model can help us to now think about tactics and principles through which we organize. Important to note here that some of the examples given in Erica's presentation speak to homogenous societies where the people holding up the pillar of power see themselves and their families in the resistors. We, of course, realize that the United States is unique in its diversity and deep anti-Black, anti-Indigenous frameworks. And often those police and military pillars holding up the power structures do not see themselves in the faces of the people and could be less likely to ignore orders around committing violence on civilians. Many communities in the United States must make a different calculus with resistance. Now, to juice your thinking for when you try this on your own later in the program. You can also find a lot more specific tactics here, and we'll drop the link in the chat. And now I'll turn it over to Lauren.
Thanks, Monifa. And I promise that this part of the presentation will not include any random commercials, pushing protein powders, or Marissa Tomei's kitchen. Great to see everyone. We're going to talk about tactics now. So let's start talking about being strategic when we're planning an action. And as we go through these, if you have ideas or examples, please put them in the chat. So some of the questions that we want to consider when we are thinking about planning an action are, one, what will generate more than a moment's headlines? What has some lasting power? What's going to keep people thinking about this on the top of their minds? What's a backfire message that doesn't backfire on us, right? So for example, how do we plan or avoid or deal with any violence that may break out? Some of the best actions end up ruined when there is violence that breaks out because it backfires on us instead of on them and ends up turning people away. Or another example is, what are messages that can be too easily co-opted or weaponized in ways that backfire on us? I think we see that a lot happening. So we need to be ahead of that. And I think a lot of you could probably put in some examples in the chat. You're seeing that in the media, that some of our messaging is getting co-opted. So how do we think about that as we plan actions, as we plan the ways that we communicate in public? Also, what is easy and simple enough that inspires others to replicate it across the country? That builds the mass and the velocity that Erica mentioned in the building momentum piece of her remarks. Easy and simple for people to be able to pick up and do themselves. And what is genuinely inclusive and brings new people into the tent? We need a lot of people, right? 3.5% of the population. How do we make this inclusive so they can see themselves in this too and feel welcomed and ready to pick up the mantle with us? The next is, how can we ensure that we use our anger wisely, right? Anger is a totally powerful emotion. And when we have the moral high ground and we're acting with dignity, anger is very compelling. So we need to think about how we're using that so that we're bringing people along with us. And as was mentioned before, what is the scale of risk and where and when do we build up to using those riskiest strategies? And who among us can afford to take more risk? Some of us can afford to take more than others in different circumstances because we're all situated with privilege differently. We really need to understand that people have to do a lot of preparation to prepare to take on any level of personal risk. So really thinking about that as you build up to an action. Next, I want to talk a little bit about distributed actions versus mass actions. So distributed actions is a decentralized mass protest where large numbers of people express their support by taking many small, simple, coordinated actions, like banging pots and pans, turning off lights, wearing the same color of clothing. We do a lot of distributed actions with our members at Moms Rising, and I'm sure that many of you have participated in that, like delivering storybooks to Congress during the same week of congressional recess, a call-in day to call your member of Congress to talk about a certain policy or topic. Other examples are Moral Mondays, Green Vests in South Dakota, Days of Action, coordinated protests like and the Tesla takedowns. That's a great example. Please continue to put ideas and examples in the chat. And then we also have mass actions. This is like the giant family separation march that we did in DC with 500,000 people, or big economic strikes that happen on the same day. Both are important and have a place in our toolkit and can be extremely effective. The third thing I want to talk about is that we need to get creative. We need to spark the imagination. This is a flood the zone moment, right? Things are coming at us in every direction. And creativity really matters. There are many examples of this, and I would love it if you all would put ideas in the chat, places that you're seeing this or things that have stuck with you. One example is, if you think back to the 99% Occupy movement, they were using guerrilla projectionists to light up the skylines of 17 bridges in 17 cities on November 17th with huge 99% bat signal light projections that sent out a message of solidarity and hope, right? It got people's attention, and it was this coordinated thing across the country. You can think about creative disruption. You could disrupt an illegitimate event by shouting or throwing things, but it might not help your cause and it might not get a lot of traction. So you need to outshine your target's message. And it's often better to disrupt with creativity. song, glitter, theatrics, costumes, a giant puppet, blow up giant balloon figures. A perfect example of this is with Republican town halls. Is there a better way to force the Republicans to respond, maybe with a song rather than shouting at them? We had a member out in Washington State who sat out in front of a Republican town hall that she couldn't get into with cupcakes that said, "Eat the rich." And people were coming and talking to her, and she created a space for a lot of conversation. It was creative, and it really got people talking. Or are you a dancer and you just love to dance? Make a flash mob in front of a Tesla storefront sidewalk and dance to a great song like Hostile Government Takeover. Next, create a petition delivery. Online petitions are ruling these days, and we can really double down on their effectiveness and their impact by doing physical deliveries on dates that are coordinated with a symbol. I remember one year when we sent paper dolls that kids across the country colored in and to represent what they wanted to be when they grew up. Like we had doctors and nurses and firefighters, all those things. And we brought those to Washington, D.C. We put those with stories from members across the country and with a petition calling on Congress to invest in affordable childcare. And we took those to every office, and they had little paper dolls from their tiny constituents from every state. You got to get creative, and they remember those things, right? That has some staying power in their brain. And finally, very powerful, but most difficult to organize are strikes, buy-ins, and buyouts, taking on economic targets. This has worked for centuries for a reason, and I think the Tesla takedowns are a really great and creative example of this. And again, something that emerged very organically and has caught the heart and soul of people across the country with a very specific and identifiable target. And it was even good thinking about how to ensure that we didn't alienate Tesla drivers who can't afford to trade in their car, or our other natural allies, right? It was bringing people in, even the people that were differently impacted by that. Okay, finally, let's talk about storytelling. My favorite part, Moms Rising's favorite part. This is the heart of the work. Storytelling is far more than telling a tale, as I think most of you know, and have likely shared a story that's personal to you. This is a way of organizing reality and political power. Fascism feeds off people being fearful and isolated. And the power of stories is that they can unite us across a common experience. We're intentionally made to feel like it's a personal failing when you can't figure out that your childcare arrangement so you can get to work or care for a loved one who is ill, right? But the truth is that when one of us steps into courage and shares our story, we let others know that they're not alone, and it helps them be brave too. A good story can build group solidarity and develop a shared analysis of a social problem, right? This isn't an individual failing. This is a policy failure. And it increases participation. It can help make this unseen seen, and it can bring solidarity from others who are not as vulnerable while elevating real people and human consequences. So this last month, 40 moms from across the country joined us for our Mother's Day event at the Capitol. And I can tell you that in sharing their stories directly with members of Congress, that really helped increase the urgency and backed up those lawmakers who are standing strong for children and families during one of the toughest times our country has faced. And it was those brave moms who stepped into their courage and shared their stories. But to really get this right, you need to make sure that you think about who you are trying to reach and what is going to resonate with them. So if you look on the slide, it walks you through some questions. Who is the most effective storyteller to your target? Is it someone who has been deeply impacted? Is it a trusted community member or a loved one that can bring the context of a community that's been impacted? You want to make sure that you practice your story. Make sure that it's real, right? You want to have your detail, but not too much. You want to keep it concise and practice, shorten, and keep in those most important details. Name the problem, name the connection to the problem, how it has impacted you, and name and ask for a solution. And I think we can all agree that storytelling is part of the power of our movement and really is a uniting factor. So continue to think about how you can use your story for power. And we're going to move along to the next part of the presentation. I'm going to hand it back over to Monifa.
Thank you so much, Lauren. That was really great. I love all of the detail and great examples there to share. Okay, finally, Erica showed us nonviolent campaigns are one way to bring about change. We know that there are always many factors and layers of organizing, and that no one campaign exists in isolation. It is important to note that these principles and nonviolent tactics are specific to change campaigns occurring in a climate that allows the public narrative to move about the conditions and rights of oppressed people. Essentially, these are narrative power strategies. Oftentimes, the right and people in power use the popularity of these specific principles and apply to certain situations and want to take them out of context and apply them to all forms of violent oppression, erasing oppressed people's human right to self-defense. Think of the many stories we've seen of people attacked by the police and they try to protect their faces and it's considered that they're not being nonviolent. Or to discredit or criminalize movements and organizations who use different tactics, like those of organizations like the Black Panther Party, the Deacons for Self-Defense, or Malcolm X, and also create a false binary between organizers within movements to stoke tensions. Remember, even Dr. King had armed guards to protect his home from police and white supremacist violence. He even applied for a permit to carry a concealed firearm. The right creates binaries between leaders as a narrative strategy to divide movements, especially Black movements. That popular, iconic image that you've seen of Malcolm X and Dr. King shaking hands and smiling happened when they were both present to support the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Understand that there are many campaigns with a diversity of tactics and that often work hand in hand and don't exist in isolation. And most importantly, principles of nonviolence, which we're going to go over, do not supersede the human right to self-defense. Now, let's review Dr. King's 6 principles of nonviolence. Principle 1, nonviolence is courageous and an active, nonviolent resistance to evil. It is aggressive, spiritual, mentally, and emotionally. Principle 2, nonviolence seeks to win friendships and understanding and create the beloved community. And the third principle, nonviolence seeks to defend injustice and evil, not just people. It recognizes that evildoers are also victims. Principle 4, nonviolence accepts that suffering can educate and transform. Nonviolence accepts unearned suffering as redemptive and transformative. Principle number 5, nonviolence chooses love instead of hate and is spontaneous, unmotivated, and creative. Principle number 6. Nonviolence believes that the universe is on the side of justice. The nonviolent resistor has a deep faith that justice will eventually win, even if there is suffering in the short term. So you can see that you can see that our movement today is rooted in a legacy of successful tools and strategies and a collective courage that continues to power us forward. Now that we're informed, I invite you to all take action in the packet linked in the chat. You'll find all the resources from today's presentation, including a worksheet to help you think through how you might apply this into your own lives and use this guide organizing in your own community. So please take this with you, and we'll see you again in the follow-up email to keep the momentum going.
I want to thank Monifa for sharing so many important lessons. I want to thank Lauren. I want to thank all of you for being on. We're not done. We have some calls to action, you all. Thank you all for building the resistance, for growing our power, for connecting, for learning with us, for leading with us, and for expanding the movement with us. Moms, dads, parents, people, and caregivers are uniquely, I heard my video wasn't on, so I had to pause to turn on my video. Sorry about that. Are uniquely positioned to turn our fear and anxiety into action. I'm trying to turn on my video and it keeps turning off, so I don't know what's going on. But hello, here I am, maybe. We work on this every single day. I know that with all of us together, it's not a question of if we will win, but when. I always say that I'm walking around these days reading the headlines with hope in my heart and fury and frustration in my soul. It's turning both the hope and the frustration into action, and we moms know how to do that. So it is really important, and I know a lot of you are ready to take action. And this is exactly what the moment calls us to do. It calls us to learn. It calls us to get together. It calls us to take action. So if you're interested in continuing to deepen your learning and building out in a community, please consider also joining a super special program that we just started called Moms Next Door. This is for moms, it's for dads, it's for anyone who's ever had a mom. We'll be putting the link in the chat right now so you can sign up to be part of Moms Next Door. This program is an opportunity to get equipped, skilled up, and fired up to lead in communities, to build the resistance, and to expand our movement. Members who sign up receive a monthly e-newsletter. It's super cool. That includes the invitation to monthly special virtual workshops where you can workshop your ideas and toolkits full of opportunities to unlock the plain insight everyday ways to connect and lead for change through political acts of service, through resistance, and through movement building. And we'd love to have you in Moms Next Door. So check out the chat. We also are including 2 more actions at the end of this time together that you can take today. Action number 2 is targeted at governors who are playing a major role in the fight to protect Medicaid right now. Why? Because in many states, Medicaid is about 30% or more of the state budget. Governors need to be concerned. Governors in red states or Republican states need to be concerned the most because it turns out the Republican states are actually utilizing disproportionately more Medicaid in their state budgets and in their communities than other states. So this is a big deal. So please sign on this special petition to governors and know that we are not done with this fight on this bad bill. The House may have passed it, but now it's up to the Senate to take it on. So we need to keep our voices raised, keep pushing the Senate, keep pushing governors to say, no way, not on our watch. We will not have this bad budget bill. Now, we have a call-in page. Speaking of the Senate, we have a call-in page that's live. We have a text to call that will connect you directly with your U.S. senators. You can just put it in the chat. Hopefully it's in the chat. Yep, there it is. It's in the chat. I see it. And just click that link and we'll connect you with your senator so you can tell them, nope, we're not doing that kind of bad budget that shifts our money that we have invested in Medicaid, in Head Start, in SNAP, to billionaire tax breaks. No, thank you. We need to tell the Senate that. Of course, and this is really important, for those of you who are on the Moms Rising email list, and I hope you all are, you know us. We are here for you. Your rain, snow, sleet, sunshine, action hub. We are always on the lookout for you to find those moments where your voice, where your engagement will make a difference, those fulcrum points of change. So we will email you, probably 3 times a week. You can ignore us if you're busy, with action opportunities. And these action opportunities are going to be ways that you can be part of creative, attention-grabbing, both effective distributed actions and also mass actions, like Monifa and Lauren have been sharing during this training. So how are you going to get those action opportunities for distributed actions and mass actions that are super fun and creative and also effective and powerful? Just make sure that you're signed up with Moms Rising. It's free, of course. And also if you can get 5, 10, 20, or 500 people to sign up with you, that's also super helpful. I want to turn it back over to Monifa for a second in case you have some questions from the audience. Monifa, do you want to take any questions?
Yes, so there are any questions? We have a Q&A chat box where you can drop some questions. Um, I don't know if people can come off mute.
I think we have 4 questions maybe in the chat.
Okay. All right, so is this being recorded? Yes, it will be available and sent to folks in a follow-up email. Yes, and 2 people asked that, and someone re-asked for the link to Moms Next Door. Yes, the actions will be in the email. And we have been dealing with the SAVE Act. We actually have an action right now that we can also drop in the chat around the SAVE Act. Thanks for mentioning that, Amy. And that's it. I don't see any more questions.
All right, we are in our closing moment, you all, and I'm really excited about this. Our closing moment is about hope for the future. I want everybody who's with us, and I know you're all with us, to think for a minute, have a second of silence just with yourself, and think about what is giving you hope. It could be seeing all of us on the Zoom, even though we're really busy tonight. It could be seeing that we caused a delay together of 5 months and how long it took the Republicans in the House to pass the very bad bill. They wanted to pass it in February. It is May 22nd. That's almost half a year that we together delayed it. There could be so many moments of hope. That moment of hope could be having a conversation. That moment of hope could be anything that's bringing you hope. I want you to put it in the chat. Don't be shy. And then to you, Monifa, what's giving you hope?
I'm definitely getting hope from the young people, particularly my own children, and so many of the actions and activists that I'm seeing coming out of just young people all over the country and all over the world. And I think when we started this, Kristen, you talked about doing it for the children. And so that's a sustained hope. It's a sustained inspiration that keeps me going.
Lauren, what's bringing you hope?
I feel so inspired by everyone who's here tonight, like taking time out of your busy days and schedules to really think about how do we own this together and how do we build this movement. And I appreciate that, and it brings me such hope. Thank you.
And I share both Monifa and Lauren's sentiments. All of you here are bringing me hope. All of the people who can't be here because they're busy are giving me hope. All of the people who are taking any 5 minutes or 5 seconds or 5 hours out of their day are bringing me hope. And you know what? Our champions in Congress are giving me hope. This week I had the incredible honor of being the recipient of a phone call. It went like this: Kristen, at 1 a.m., Republicans are going to start considering the very bad bill. Could you come down to the U.S. Capitol in the rain and bear witness? And do you know what? I got there. There were so many people in the rain at 1 a.m. protesting the very bad bill vote. And do you know what? It took, again, a lot longer than they thought it would take to pass that bill. So all of us together is bringing me hope across organizations, across communities, across the country, across all of us. Each of us taking that 5 seconds is adding up to a tsunami of change. So I want to thank everybody for coming on tonight. I want to thank Lauren. I want to thank Monifa. I want to thank Speaker Emerita Pelosi. I want to thank Olivia and Jessica Geronimo. I want to thank Catalina. I want to thank all the people, our interpreters. Thank you to our interpreters for helping to make tonight happen. And I want to thank you for spending time tonight. That concludes our program. Thank you again. We'll be following up with an email that does have a lot of the resources that we shared. So don't worry if you missed them in the chat. We're going to actually send them to you. And how can you get a Moms Rising tee? We have those on our website under merch and gifts. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Have a great night, everyone. And I'm so excited to be rising together. Thank you.